All right, here we go on lesson 5, teacher planning. So we have looked at, I'm just going to flip my mouse back over here. We looked at research, credible research, and now we're jumping, I kind of like this one, Center for the Study of Phenomena that have scientists scratching their heads, and they're all scratching their heads. So we're going now from research into teacher planning. And teacher planning equals good teaching. So when you are a teacher, your life will be planning, which I think is super exciting. It's so much fun to take a concept and plan something for the children and then actually do it and then reflect upon it. Remember that for reflective practitioner, and then make it better for the next time. That's always what we're doing. We're planning, we're doing the lesson, and then reflecting. And that's all part of good teaching. Okay, so let's have a look. The students, when we plan, need to be the first thing, I don't want to say thing, the first people that we need to think about. So if we just generically plan without thinking about our particular students, we have generic teaching and learning, and we have generic classrooms. We don't want you to be generic. We want you to be going, okay, these are my particular students in front of me right now. What is the best thing for their learning that I need to do? Okay. So it's important that you know their strengths and you know the challenges of your students in the following areas. So academically, effort, attitude, social interaction, personality, and you really need to know students in order to plan. And this will be a little tricky in your first year of teaching because you don't know the students, but after that you kind of have an idea of the students that are coming to you. And so you want to be thinking about planning with really your students at the core. So we're going to be looking at, in our Collaborate time, we're going to look at last week's reading, I think it's page 18, 19, that first class of Annette's. And we're going to have a little bit of a go with what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses? How would you plan for that particular class? So be ready to do that. I'll have, so if you want to have that PDF ready to go, that'd be good. Okay, so basically teacher planning. Excuse me. Whoa, I just went crazy on my other screen here. Basically, teacher planning, you need to think about what will be taught, when will it be taught, how to establish the type of learning environment or community needed, and what instructional approaches will be used. The final one, how and when learning will be assessed or evaluated, I'm going to look at in a separate lecture. That's why it's in italics. So we're going to look at the first four right now. So basically, what will be taught? You have an Alberta Program of Studies for each subject area. So this is an Alberta Education, Alberta government document that every teacher is required to teach for that particular grade or for that particular subject. So it looks kind of like this. I'm just going to go here. It looks like this. So if you go to this website, and I would like you to do this, stop the video and just kind of go here, and you get to the programs of studies, click on the core programs here and select whatever you're most interested in. So if you think you want to teach junior high phys ed, click on the phys ed curriculum. If you want to teach elementary, click on the elementary, and just have a little bit of a go with what are kind of the outcomes for your particular area of interest in there. So I'm going to have you just do that so you get a sense that this is your overall guiding document. It's not just every teacher for himself or herself. It's definitely you have some particular outcomes to look at. So stop, have a look through that, and then we'll continue on. Okay, let's continue on. Now that you've had a little bit of a look at that curriculum, at that program of study or that curriculum guide. So continuing on, what will be taught? Basically, you have professional freedom as a teacher to, as long as it connects with those outcomes that you just saw on the last slide, your interest and passion. So again, I'll use the Greek mythology. If you're super into Greek mythology and you're teaching grade 6 English language arts, do a Greek mythology unit, because think about going back to motivation. You're going to be super into it. You're going to be motivated to really bring in some really interesting things, and that will just sweep the kids up with you. So don't disregard your own interests and passions when you have some leeway in your program. Think again about the students' interests and passions. If you have kids that are like super into dinosaurs and you're teaching grade 2, probably you want to do a dinosaur unit, because again, they'll be motivated to be more into it, and ultimately their learning will be affected positively. That's what we want. And authentic learning experiences. We don't want, there's a lot of busy work that happens in schools, lots of arts and craftsy kind of thing. That's not your job. Your job is to be teaching these outcomes and to be going after those outcomes that are prescribed for you by the Alberta government. So authentic learning experiences, including cross-curricular, so bringing English, math, science, social, all those things. Concept-based, where you're talking more about a concept like power versus just focusing on, one story or one aspect. You want to think about community classrooms, taking your kids out of the classroom and into the real world. And then ultimately, connection to the real world is, how do we take what we're learning in school and actually apply it in the real world? So that's the idea of what will be taught. Okay. When will it be taught? This is, so you have to think about your content. So you probably are not going to talk about Christmas traditions in May. So you're going to think about, what does the year look like? The length of time needed. How much time do you have in a year? And how much time do you think you would need for your dinosaur unit? Could you do a whole dinosaur unit in a week? Or do you need 6 weeks? So those are your decisions. Sequential learning. Basically, this is the idea that you need to teach some ideas first and then progress. So you probably want your kids to be pretty good at addition and subtraction before you bring in multiplication, or else they'll be totally lost. Think about the maturity of your students. My daughter in grade 12 here at Crescent Heights, she did this really amazing sort of personal narrative. Like, her whole class had to really dive into something that was really personal and really connected to who they were, and then share it with the class. And the teacher very smartly did this near the end of the year, when she had established a really supportive classroom environment. If she'd done that in the first week of class, the kids would not have been ready emotionally, or their maturity would not have been there to get the kind of work that she got out of them when she placed that at the end of the year. Okay. Also think about holidays and PD days, all those things where you just like took off as a student, you have to be thinking about as a teacher. So you don't want to have a unit that suddenly, you come back from Christmas holidays and you have 2 days after Christmas holidays of one unit. And then you want to kind of finish things up before holidays so that it's nice and neat and finished, and then you start new. Think about cross-curricular when it fits in with other subject areas. Maybe if you're talking about life cycles in science, then you might want to do an English writing project on the same kind of thing. So be thinking about how you can connect, and always think about working with other teachers. When are other teachers doing the same thing? How can you maybe bring your classes together? And then maybe if you all decide that you want to do an autumn theme, obviously in like October, then you would all do that together. Okay, so that's the kind of when will it be taught. Establishing a learning environment and community. We're going to answer these questions and collaborate because I think it makes the most sense. So again, be thinking about, what are ways we can create a welcoming environment in our class, and how can we create a classroom community in which belonging is the norm? All of us as human beings, we want to belong. We want to walk into a classroom and feel like we are honored and respected and that we belong. It's not always the case for kids. Sometimes they really don't feel like they belong. And if you don't feel like you belong, all you're concerned about is figuring out how you can belong, which impacts learning. It just makes it really difficult to concentrate on anything other than I just want to belong. It's a base human need, and we'll look at that a little later on in this class. So be ready to discuss and collaborate. So what I'm looking for here are, I'm going to give you a couple examples. I don't want to give you too many because I want you to come up with some, but things like just knowing the kids' names. If you're teaching high school, you got to know those kids' names. You can't be 3/4 of the way through the semester and still going, ah, yeah, you in the yellow hoodie. They don't feel welcome. They're like, yeah, you can't even bother to learn my name. Okay. Another one might be connecting with parents. If you are teaching grade 1, you want to connect with those parents because that will just help to create a welcoming environment. When the children see that you're talking with mom, they're going to feel that much more at home in your classroom. Okay, so come up with some of those ideas and we'll talk about those in collaborate time. Okay, let's talk about instructional approaches now. So this was number 4 on the list. So let's have a little bit of a go. And again, we're going to do this in collaborate, but I want you to kind of start to think about it. What you basically are going to do with an instructional approach, when you do top-down approach, is basically you start with that Alberta education document that we looked at several slides back, and then you as a teacher go, okay, this is how I'm actually going to fulfill those outcomes. So basically, you look at the objectives for the year. Oops, here we go. Objectives for the year. Then you determine the curricula or units for each term, and then you determine the specifics of how you'll teach each unit and lesson on a daily basis. You will basically, this is your life. This is what you do then. This bottom little bit here in the italics is then you plan your specific units and lessons throughout the year. When I was teaching, I generally was about 2 or 3 days ahead in my lesson planning, but I had my whole year and all my units basically planned going into the year. Maybe not all my units, but for sure my year plan. So we are going to do this again in collaborate time. We're going to actually put a Phys Ed 10 year plan, rough year plan together. So if you don't know anything about Phys Ed 10, have a look again at this particular program and just be ready to think about what kind of units, what kind of activities could fulfill these particular outcomes. Okay. Basically, there are a couple of instructional approaches. There is teacher-centered approach, where teacher determines the content, provides direction, and sets academic and social tone. So this is kind of what I'm doing right now. This is very teacher-centered. I'm deciding the content, I'm giving it to you, and you are absorbing every single word, right? A student-centered approach is where the teacher adopts constructivist perspective, so wanting the student to actually construct the knowledge on their own with a little bit of push, a little bit of mentoring from the teacher, and acknowledges that students actively construct their own understandings. So that's a little bit of student-centered, where you give them a problem and then they figure out how to solve it instead of you just giving them all the information. Okay, so something like a science fair would be a student-centered approach, where they come up with an idea, they go after it, and they do everything with you just helping and mentoring in there. Okay. When to use each instructional approach? Basically, you kind of are doing both of these approaches, weaving them in and out of your school day, because you have to have some teacher-centered. You have to kind of be like, okay, here's some information. Here are some ways that you can learn multiplication, let's say. So you throw those at the kids, and then you step back and let them have some student-centered time. So basically, what you want to do is think about teacher-centered time or a direct approach when you are distributing facts, when you're doing some skilled-based activities where they really actually need these particular skills in a particular order, and particular just content. They just need some content to get going. Low achievers who have an external focus, so they need something to focus on, or extreme behavior issues. So if you have a classroom that is it's just kind of hard to control, you might want to do a little bit more teacher-centered because it generally is less chaotic. And if you have a traditional space with desks facing the teacher and you cannot move them, it's more conducive to teacher-centered. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't move those desks, but that if you have a really, if your physical space is set up that way, it's more conducive for teacher-centered. More student-centered approach, this is when you are wanting to bring in ideas of critical thinking, problem solving, or inquiry, where they actually you kind of want them to mess around a little bit and critically think about a particular problem. The student-centered approach works if you have lots of good self-starters where they're like, yeah, let's jump in, and independent workers. It doesn't mean that you can't help those kids who maybe have trouble working independently. That's part of your job, is to actually train them how to work independently. And if you have supportive space like tables, carpet, sofa, and colleagues who won't shush you. So if you send your kids out in the hallway to work independently, you have to have a school belief that a little noise in the hallway is okay, versus a very quiet, nobody's working in the hallway, nobody's disturbing other classes kind of thing in there. So that's kind of what you need to ultimately run that student-centered approach. Okay, so this is, again, what we're going to do in Collaborate Time. I want you to think about what each approach looks like in the classroom. So a very teacher-centered approach, give me either examples from your own schooling or from your practicum, and what do you think are the pros and cons? And then what's a very student-centered approach? And again, examples from your own personal schooling or your practicum, and give me some pros and cons. So we're going to do that in Collaborate, but be ready with some ideas there. And finally, instructional plan. Oh, no, not finally. I got a couple more here. Instructional planning. Again, we're going to do this in Collaborate, so jot some things down. To which approach to teaching do you gravitate? Do you like the idea of teacher-centered, where you are standing at the front of the classroom, kind of doing what I'm doing right now, imparting knowledge? Or do you like a little bit more student-centered, where it's like, here, children, here is an idea, run with it, I'm going to mentor, guide, that kind of thing. And which methodology at this point do you think you will use, and why? Again, we're going to have some time to discuss this with your colleagues, so jot some ideas down so that you're ready for our Collaborate Time. Okay, basically, the results of effective planning, so all of these things that we've talked about, these 4 points that we've talked about, end up in excellent instruction, enhanced student learning, and exemplary environments, which is ultimately what we want in teaching. So planning is definitely worth it, and definitely your job. So you want to do it really well. Okay, that's the end of that. I just wanted to let you know one more thing. We're going to do a little review of our first 5 lessons on Collaborate. And so just have your notes available. It's going to be in groups. It'll just be a little bit of a review, just to try to keep all of this information floating, because that's what you have to do as a teacher, is be able to keep all this information floating and be able to combine and pull at a moment's notice. Awesome. We'll see you for Collaborate, and hope you enjoyed this romp through instructional strategies.